We've talked a lot about the lead up to sweeping a homeless camp, how sometimes the advocates say, you can't sweep this. This is their personal property. You wouldn't want your personal property loaded up in a truck and thrown away, would you? No, but I'm also not living in a public park, or I'm not living on a public street or a sidewalk where this stuff is going on. So we've got a situation down in Portland where 1 month after a pretty famous homeless camp was swept, neighbors say the situation now is even worse. So this is kind of a follow-up on, all right, the sweep happens, then what? That's what we're talking about today. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Sean Reynolds. What is my name? I own a couple of real estate companies here in the Seattle market, and I talk about news for reasonable people. Is having a homeless encampment swept and then goes right back to being even worse than before, is that reasonable? No, it's not. That's why we're talking about it. All right, let's jump on in. So cleanups at Southeast 94th and Pardee don't stay cleaned up. What? You clean up once and it just doesn't, it's like the kitchen floor, right? You clean it up and I did a pretty good job. And you look like a night or two later and like, God, who was eating chips and wasn't sitting down over their plate? Like your mom always says, sit down when you eat. Well, that's so the crap doesn't go everywhere. I like to eat standing up. I really do. I like to eat on the run, wherever I go, my food is with me. That's how I enjoy dining. So, why wouldn't that be? So it's just like that. I mean, no, it's not like the kitchen floor at home. When you've got people living in tents, there's all kinds of other stuff going on. And guess what? Garbage does not get picked up unless somebody literally goes in there and picks up a whole bunch of the garbage, or an encampment gets bad enough where city comes in, Department of Transportation, they do a sweep, spend thousands of your hard-earned tax dollars to do said sweep. And then, just weeks later, in this case, like about 4 weeks later, looking at it going, God, this is even worse than before. This isn't good. Many people live in the area of Southeast 94th and Pardee, not far from Portland's Lents Park. Some live in homes, some live in tents. Fernando is one of those who live under tents and tarps along that stretch. The night before KOIN 6 News went to the area, Fernando was burning a candle to keep warm. His tent caught on fire. He and his girlfriend barely escaped. We have talked multiple times about one of the more significant safety factors of the homeless encampments is tents catching on fire. They are flammable, folks. They're nylon. Oftentimes they're coated with a water repellent, and they go up like a tent on fire. I mean, I had to, moving into my remodeled house, and I'm sorting out all my gear, trying to be the good guy and making sure all my stuff, when it goes back into the house, it's all sorted out. One of those things is kind of the family camping tent. My kids use it. Both my kids have used it. I use it. So it's like that tent. It's really easy to put up and down. And so I was working with that, and I was just, doing all these podcasts, and you start thinking, if I was living in this, oh my gosh, this thing is so flammable. If this caught on fire, you couldn't even, get time to get water or the fire extinguisher. If you're living in a homeless encampment, it's not very realistic to have a fire extinguisher nearby. I haven't seen that move. But maybe there are responsible tent dwellers, urban dwellers out there who are doing said thing. But most of the time it's like, the tent does catch on fire, and you and your girlfriend or whomever you're staying in the tent, you can barely get out of there in time, and everything just goes up in flames. One of the homeless encampments that I was talking about last week, that the reason I was talking about it is because it left wave after wave of rats going into the neighborhood. Yeah, that happened. That's a whole podcast. Yeah. I mean, this is just the stuff we're talking about. One of the video clips I saw of that encampment, and this is on a major arterial going into downtown Seattle. You had this big fire going on because somebody's tent had caught on fire. You have a candle burning to try and keep things warm. I understand people need to stay warm. That's kind of how you remain living. But in the Pacific Northwest, you can get pretty damn cold in a tent. I mean, it's cold. It's not, sometimes it's freezing, literally like freezing, but the vast majority of time it's not. But still, you get wet and you get down into the low 40s. That's hypothermia and die time. It just is. So I understand wanting to burn a candle, but when you're in a tent, flames in tent, hard no-go. That's a no-go. So I woke up to the smoke, Fernando said. I just started putting the fire out, just trying to get my breath and get my girl out so they don't die from, their house going up in flames, right? But the fire consumed everything. There's nothing left to get. This is a whole garbage now. He even lost the birthday present he bought for his daughter. So when people say, just let them be in their tent, they're not doing anything wrong. Well, even just say they're not doing anything wrong. Say they're not doing the whole, selling stolen goods, doing drugs, taking drugs, stolen handguns, that kind of thing. Maybe they're not doing that, prostitution, all the stuff that we see as storylines with homeless encampments. Say they're not doing that. Just physically living in a tent long-term isn't safe. It's not, because maybe you're not running the candle in your tent. Maybe the guy next door to you is. And are you going to tell him, hey, shut that candle off? No, you're probably not going to know it. He's got it inside his tent. His tent goes up. Your tent goes up. I mean, it's not safe. There's so many reasons why this is not safe. And you need to have people, either in a place where they can get the mental help they need, or in a place where they can get off whatever drugs they're on, or a combination of the two, or into housing where they can figure out how to, how to make this work, how to make it go. And so you need some pretty major intervention from the government to make this go. And right now, all we're really doing is, doing a little sweepy sweep every now and then. And, we try and get a couple of people now and then into, how temporary housing, whatever, maybe put them into a tiny shelter. I mean, it just seems like it's not happening fast enough. And so you've got these tent fires happening, and you've got these situations where once a sweep happens, it's just business as usual, and oftentimes it's worse. So Todd Littlefield lives directly across the street from where the fire that took Fernando's tent. He said this happens all the time, once a week, and these are brutal fires. They're scary. The fire I saw it was Mercer Street and Dexter Avenue North. I mean, it was like, oh, geez, that is a rager. I mean, you talk about having a bonfire at the ocean. Yeah, this is like that. Instead, with somebody's life inside of it. It just, mind-boggling, right? Littlefield said his neighbors had several close calls. She's had a half a dozen fires right next to her home that if they weren't home to put them out in the middle of the night, their home would have been inflamed. We did have a building go in an entire, I think it was commercial building or was it an apartment? It was vacant, fortunately, but down in Venice Beach, there was just this, area that clearly used to have a footprint of a building. And then all of a sudden, nope, it's gone. Fire took it out. And that was from a tent going up in flames. So, you put a flaming tent up against a wood frame building. Yeah, that does not have a happy ending. So about a month ago, crews came to see the area for a full cleanup. Within a few days, the tents, tarps, and homeless piles of garbage, needles, and trash returned. And why wouldn't they? These people and their problems haven't changed. They haven't gone anywhere since the area got cleaned up. It just goes right back to where it was before, right? For months, Will and Ashley had been living in a broken down trailer on the street. They don't like living in garbage or what people think of when they see the trash. Like, oh, you're homeless, so you're dirty homeless, Will said. You know what I'm saying? Like, or you're trashy because your neighbor's trashy. Really? I actually feel for the homeowners a lot because as a homeowner, and I have kids, I wouldn't want to have to come out here and see all this. See, even the homeless know, this is a no-go. This is a hard no-go. But I think we make ourselves feel just a little bit better when we sweep these things out and pick up the garbage. I mean, I know we do. And there are outreach programs as part of, sweeping out the garbage and sweeping out these encampments. But so often, the vast majority of the residents, they just move a little further down the road. and they come right back when the coast is clear, because you can't sweep everywhere all the time. So once something gets a sweep, well, it's, that date is written down, and okay, now we need to move on to the next one that needs more attention than the one that's going to go back to, equal to and or worse than it was at the beginning. Neighborhoods become eyesores and health hazards, the homeless forced out by cleanup, only to return again. This is the unending cycle seen across the city, Portland. You can either blame the city and county leaders for a lack of an urgent homeless plan, or you can become part of the solution and tackle the problem with simple acts of decency and kindness. Okay, but simple acts of decency and kindness, they do go a long way, but those are also they're not the solution. You got to get these people help. These people can't be on the sidewalk. They can't be in our public parks. They need to be somewhere else getting the help and care that they, so deserve as human beings. Instead, we just kind of sweep them out, and then we put them in some kind of housing, because that whole, housing first kind of thing where, well, if you just get them a house, I'm sure they'll get off the heroin. You just get them a roof over their head. They'll get off the opioids. They'll get off the fentanyl. Well, it doesn't really work like that. It's a step in the right direction. Yes. And maybe it coincides with them being at a point in their lives where they're, willing to go down a road of trying to figure out some sobriety, or, maybe they've come out of jail or whatever. And they can't quite figure out where to go. Nobody wants to take them in, and they end up homeless again. And then, things just start to go sideways. Got to be able to help these folks out. And, oftentimes they're mental, or the addiction issues are there. So, maybe they're doing okay for a while, and then, they get in a situation where they just can't quite figure it out. And then as taxpayers, we pay for their cleanup and their ongoing whatever and we've just decided that, letting them live in a tent in the outdoors, what could possibly go wrong? Well, we know what goes wrong. Number one, you got tent fires. And that's as far as big ticket items in a homeless encampment, just living there alone is dangerous enough, right? You've got all kinds of characters there that don't seem to care about the fragility of human life. They just don't care. That's not their thing. So they're working on a different set of circumstances than the rest of us. And so these homeless folks that are caught up in this, they need some real help, not just cleaning of their yard and cleaning of their tent and helping them get picked up and, and just putting somebody in housing. Yeah, that's not going to work either. But, a lot of people are like, well, this is the first step. Okay. This thing is still going on, right? Anybody who needs a shower, we give them a shower. Shower is some people point to getting clean and, these acts of kindness as the first step. All right. But then we've got so many people who don't want to get clean. They don't want to get sober. They don't want to take their medication. They don't want to work on their stuff or be in an environment where they're controlled, because they like living on their own. They like doing their drugs. They like doing whatever it is that they're out there. And so the rest of us are just like, this is what our authorities are telling us. Okay. It's just wild. So they've got this thing called a wellness fair at Lents Park, and it's where homeless services are desperately needed. Besides showers, there's also food, outreach help, a chance to get COVID shots, and haircuts. Kind of some basic necessity stuff, and that goes a long way. So now I'm looking at where this park is, and I think it's I-5. I-5 is right off to the west. Is that I-5? Massive freeway system. No, that's not I-5. That's not enough lanes. I could look this up on Google. That would be the smart thing to do, but I didn't. And I wasn't anticipating talking about this photo. But for those of you on the audio portion, we've got on the right-hand side, the right third of the photo is a street going north and south. And then to the right of that street is just a typical residential neighborhood. You've got maybe a commercial building, some kind of big shop, shed, something, but the majority of it residential homes and things like that. And then you've got a whole bunch of campers, and that side of the street doesn't look good. And then you've got a kind of a median section. And by median, I mean, must be 150 feet wide section separating the residential section from the freeway section. And it is just loaded up with tents. I mean, it just looks like somebody dumped Tent City out, of a bag and just let it litter across the ground. And that's what it looks like. It just looks terrible. And this is what a lot of these areas look like. People want to say, it's okay. They're just down on their luck. They're not doing anything wrong. And these are the same people that are just clamoring for the Green New Deal. How about the damage we're doing to the environment here by just leaving all kinds of garbage and crap spread around the earth? How about that? I mean, literally just garbage. If somebody dumped this garbage out from their car while they're going down the street, the mutual aid would just lose their minds. They'd absolutely lose their mind. That's not very green. That's not respecting the environment. No, neither is this. It's not. It's just, it looks terrible, and it is terrible for the environment. So what we do to kind of make the situation feel a little bit better is we go through, we do a sweep, and, we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money on a cleanup. And we get it cleaned up, and then we start all over again. This is literally what we're doing. This is our short-term solution. So it ends up in resolving, like this article says, it solves nothing. These sweeps don't solve anything. Neighbors also understand the problem. They live next to it. Some volunteer at the wellness fair. They take part in neighborhoods cleanups, even if the results don't last long. It's like, this is just what we're doing. This is the short-term solution we have to a situation that absolutely demands a long-term solution. We just don't have one. And, we're spending billions of dollars on this. And it seems like every time you turn around, somebody's got a new solution. And yet it just kind of keeps getting worse. Now, one of the things I read about last week was we've got these tiny homes in Seattle, and we've got all these communities. After about 6 months, which I think is probably a fair assessment, after about 6 months, these tiny homes, the paint starts to fade, and the graffiti starts to get a little bit rougher, and the damage to the units, because they're occupied by people who sometimes have mental issues, and things tend to go sideways at times. And you hear what I'm saying. These places are not going to stay pristine because they don't have the pride of ownership that, a single family home, it costs $400,000, on average in a lot of these markets. A decent single family home, that's like $900 in Seattle now. So, you can see how people are not able to afford the cost of living here. And yet living in a tent in our parks is not the way to do it. I don't have a great solution. Maybe these, tiny homeless encampments, all right, you're getting some people off the street, but even those have to be kept up. And so even the news stories coming out right now, after maybe like a year or 6 months of these places being set up, they're like, groups of a little bit bigger than a backyard shed. But they provide a roof over people's heads, and they do that function. So, even those communities go sideways super quick after just a little bit because, the folks that are living there, they lead some tough lives. They just do. And, things don't always work out particularly well. And I think it's just, it's so hard to keep these communities together. So bless the hearts of the people that are organizing and doing the cleanups. And I'm part of that. Littlefield told KOIN 6 News. But for the neighborhoods and for the campers, it does nothing in reality. Okay, there's the hard truth. It does nothing in reality. Doesn't solve anybody getting off the street. Just makes everybody feel a little bit warmer and fuzzier inside. I mean, everybody, especially if you're living within this squalor. Maybe you don't care. Maybe you're not mentally able to care, but there's got to be, some kind of reward for, there's less garbage in my environment now, something along those lines. So let's be honest. This is the quote. Let's be honest. It does nothing. It solves nothing. And we're talking about the, sweeps of the homeless encampment. And these are people involved in doing, sweeps, and they're in the midst of it. So what is the answer? To me, it's got to be a multi-pronged approach, and you've got to have all kinds of services, and you've also got to put people in jail when people need to go to jail, and people who need the mental stuff squared away, you need to put them in an environment where they can get that help. Same thing with cleaning people out, because these, it used to be when I was a kid, whenever that was, God, way back when, that the homeless, it was usually attributed to booze, right? They had a drinking problem. They couldn't put the booze down, couldn't put the bottle down. And now it's wildly, clearly, statistically, it's drugs. And I don't know if you've noticed, but the amount of effort it takes somebody to get off of fentanyl, some kind of opioid, it is brutal, because that stuff just takes over your body and makes it so that the one thing you do that day is get high. It's the perfect drug, right? I mean, heroin, all that other stuff, same category. Very difficult to get off. And if you ever watch somebody kick, it is not fun. And they are best doing that in detox as part of a program, detox 30 days. And 30 days isn't going to do it, but sometimes it does when that person's ready, because usually they'll do that, or they'll overdose or something along those lines. You're not typically a drug addict on this stuff forever, especially not the fentanyl. You're just not. I mean, something is going to wildly go sideways, and, it might mean good night on a permanent basis. And we're talking about one specific agency here. We're talking about Solve, which is only picking up trash. It's not moving people. All right. So how do you stop the garbage trash and used needles from simply piling up again? We don't have an answer for how to solve the problem, Nietzsche said. But what we are here to do is, if you want to make an impact and help your neighborhood, it's a very tangible way to do that. This particular neighborhood is desperate for help. Days after this cleanup, dozens of bags of trash were piled high with new and growing piles of garbage and used needles on the ground. They're trying to help with services, and they're not trying to end the problem. We need solutions that are an end to the problem, Littlefield said, and the root causes: mental illness and drug addiction. So if we're not tackling those two issues, we're wasting our time, energy, and taxpayer money, and it's never going to be solved. All right. So you throw that out there. It's like, the genius statement. Oh, you have really identified it. Okay. Now come up with a solution. Yeah, that's the tricky part. Coming up with a solution to keep everybody happy. Because unfortunately, a lot of the solutions that I think might work, they're not going to be tried in Portland. They're not going to be tried in Seattle. They're not going to be tried in San Francisco, because you're actually going to have to be kind of harsh with people. These people are already living harsh lives. They're aware of harsh. They might actually have to do something that's going to be a little bit of an uphill struggle, because any which way you try and get these folks help, it's gonna be a struggle, right? I mean, struggle bus, no question about it. And, you don't want to flippantly say those kinds of things, because it's incredibly difficult for people to, be out on the street on their own, and they're mentally they're not firing on all cylinders. They're a 6-cylinder firing on 3.5. And that's out on the streets is not where you want these folks to be. And I read about a lot of young people, and it's just brutal as a parent to be reading along going, oh, geez, somebody else's kid got killed. And I was reading this weekend, somebody, murdered with a blunt object, and they were 20 something. And it was just like, well, I wish I could unread this article, because I just don't need that floating around in my head. And yet it's there. And yet I think we need to have this floating around in our head, because that's the only way. If enough people get this, these understand kind of what's going on. That's part of why I do this podcast, so that we don't, there aren't large contingents of people. It's okay. They'll be okay. Living in a tent in the park is fine. They're just doing their thing. They're trying to square themselves away. Now, there's a lot of danger, and there's a lot of liability, and there's a lot of stuff that kind of goes on that, unless you follow these stories, you're just not really aware of how unreasonable it is for this stuff to be going on. Most people are, they're like, somebody living in a park? Since when do we do that? Oh, in Seattle for quite some time. In Portland for quite some time. Does San Francisco actually allow people to live in the parks there? I'm not sure what the policy is there. But LA, Venice Beach, Echo Park, when they cleaned that out, what, a couple hundred tents? Oh my word. That's a massive cleanup. When they cleaned up the boulevard on Venice Beach, I mean, that was a monster cleanup. They cleaned out all the racquetball courts, all the, stuff just taken over by the homeless and all their gear, all the couches, waterfront couch overlooking the ocean. How epic is that? Except if you're going there to enjoy the natural beauty and you weren't really expecting to see a slightly waterlogged, soggy couch because it rained yesterday. Even in LA, it does rain now and then. And then, you got stuff in just a beautiful, beautiful environment. It's like our parks here in Seattle. We get some amazing parks if you pick up all the syringes, if you pick up all the garbage and you move the tents out and, all this stuff. Just crazy. So we got to kind of whack down at the root causes and get going on that. But nobody's had kind of a clear, concise way of how to do that because everybody's arguing about, housing first. And nope, they need contingent housing. Got to be sober. Get in. And then you've got the county buying stuff and cities buying stuff. And on a national basis, everybody comes up with, we should do this. It's wild, right? That we are so developed and yet we can't seem to figure out how to house all of our people. Wild. All right. That's it for me on this one. But in Portland, the little sweepy sweep, it looks good and it makes people feel temporarily all jazzed up and really doing something. But unfortunately, just goes back to being the way it was and or worse. So I'll keep recording these podcasts. And when somebody comes up with a genius idea that actually works, we'll focus on that for a while. But until then, unfortunately, I feel like we're just going to get some more of these and it just sucks, right? Okay. That's it for me. Thanks so much for being here on this kind of a Debbie Downer of a podcast, but it's just not reasonable. Just not. Thanks again for being here. We'll catch up soon. Bye for now.